The Senate Foreign Relations Committee passed a bill Tuesday that, if enacted, would call for sanctions on the Chinese government and select individuals over the mass imprisonment of potentially millions of Muslims in concentration camps in eastern Xinjiang province. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, under Xi Jinping, has building hundreds of re-education centers that it claims are vocational training facilities for Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other minorities. Those who have survived them call them concentration camps, locations where they are taken by force to learn Mandarin, renouncing their Muslim faith, memorize communist propaganda songs, and engage in slave labor. Survivors report the widespread use of torture, including electroshock and sleep deprivation, and, in some cases, killing. Up to 3 million Muslims and others of inconvenient ethnic or religious identity are believed to be trapped in the camps, according to the U.S. government. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee introduced a bill to address the situation in November and passed it, to be voted on by the full Senate, on Wednesday. Senators Robert Menendez, DNJ, and Marco Rubio, RFL, introduced the bill. It received widespread bipartisan support from some of the more hardline members of both parties, according to a press release from Senator Rubio's office. Among the sponsors are Senators Bernie Sanders, IVT, Elizabeth Warren, DMA, Tom Cotton, RR, and Chuck Grassley, REA. Following the passage of the act in committee, Senator Rubio said, "It is long overdue to hold Chinese government and Communist Party officials accountable for systemic and egregious human rights abuses against Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim minorities in Xinjiang, calling the act an important step. Today we are all Uyghurs, and China's horrific and systematic abuse of its Uyghur minority is an affront to all people who value the principles of universal human rights. And Beijing's imposition of systemic mass surveillance in Xinjiang should send a chill down the spine of every person who values humanity, human life, and ethnic, religious and cultural freedom," Senator Menendez said in a statement. The bill's text delineates a list of human rights abuses evidence shows are occurring in Xinjiang, including the imprisonment of Uyghurs and their torture within the vocational centers. The bill urges President Donald Trump to condemn abuses against Turkic Muslims by Chinese authorities in Xinjiang and call on Chinese President Xi Jinping to recognize the profound abuse and likely lasting damage of China's current policies, and immediately close the political re-education camps. It goes on to encourage the State Department to impose targeted sanctions on members of the government of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party, and state security apparatus, including Xinjiang Party Secretary Chen Quango and other officials credibly alleged to be responsible for human rights abuses in Xinjiang and elsewhere. The bill also suggests that Chinese corporations building and maintaining the camps should be added to the Department of Commerce entity list that restricts business with Americans. The bill's major requirement, rather than suggestion, is a report on national security threats to the United States that may arise from the abuses in Xinjiang from the Director of National Intelligence. In November, when the bill was first introduced, Reps. Chris Smith, R&J, and Thomas Suozzi, DNY, were reportedly tasked with introducing it in the House of Representatives. The most recent reports on the matter estimate that China has built as many as 1,200 concentration camps for Muslims. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs Randall Shriver told reporters this month that at least 1 million but likely closer to 3 million citizens out of a population of about 10 million in Xinjiang are imprisoned in the camps. "The camps are so agonizing," a Kazakh survivor told Radio Free Asia, RFA, on Monday, that officials have established specific crying time to give those imprisoned a chance to release their frustrations. "They say, now you can cry, but if we cry at other times when we feel the need, they criticize and threaten us, saying they will move us to a different camp," Xyrol Kenkizi told the outlet. "When we feel sad and cry, they say, you cannot cry now, you can only cry when it is your allotted crying hour. At the crying hour, they shout at us, now you cry." Outside of the camp, residents of Xinjiang say that China has turned their province into a sprawling surveillance state and are using force and threats of imprisonment to get residents to abandon their Uyghur identity and Islam. The World Uyghur Congress, an advocacy group, revealed this week that Chinese police are using the opportunity of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan to repress Uyghur Muslims, threatening them if they do not eat pork, a haram food, when they are supposed to be fasting. Public fasting during Ramadan has long been frowned upon and banned in Urumqi, the Xinjiang capital. Taxpayer-funded National Public Radio, NPR, has republished its style guide in the wake of recent abortion legislation, urging its staff to stick to language that does not accidentally humanize the unborn child. According to the guide, doctors are mistaken when they offer to show a pregnant woman a sonogram of her baby, since a baby is not a baby until it is born. NPR employees may not refer to fetal heartbeat legislation, the guide declares, because at 6 weeks, when a heartbeat can first be detected, the mother is carrying an embryo and not a fetus. The NPR abortion language guide also forbids use of the term partial birth abortion, since that is the term used by opponents. They should instead use the more obscure term intact dilation and extraction to describe the procedure. Other banned terminology includes the expressions abortion clinics, abortion doctors, and unborn babies, the guide notes, since they could possibly have a negative connotation. The term unborn implies that there is a baby inside a pregnant woman, not a fetus. Babies are not babies until they are born, it declares. Far from guaranteeing fair or neutral language, the NPR guide plants itself firmly on the side of the abortion lobby. NPR's guide to speaking about abortion coincides perfectly with the guide produced by abortion giant Planned Parenthood, which aims to manipulate public opinion about abortion by controlling the language used to describe it. In its guide, Planned Parenthood similarly prohibits the use of the expression partial birth abortion, as well as personhood, taxpayer funding of abortion, chemical abortion, and crisis pregnancy centers, which Planned Parenthood calls fake clinics. Despite the fact that NPR is partially funded by taxpayer dollars, its language advocates for a radical pro-abortion agenda and directly against the position of the 3/4 of Americans who favor banning abortions after 20 weeks. NPR receives taxpayer funding in the form of grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CBC, which are essential to its existence, according to the NPR website. Some 12% of NPR's public radio station revenues are from U.S. taxes, and in 2017 it received nearly $2 million from CPB as well as other federal grants. Thursday at her weekly press briefing, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, DCA, told reporters she is concerned for the well-being of President Donald Trump. Pelosi said, "We don't want it to be partisan now, but I can only think he wasn't up to the task of figuring out the difficult choices of how to cover the cost of infrastructure legislation that we had talked about." The president again stormed out. "First pound the table, walk at the door. Next time, have the TV cameras in there while I have my say," and that didn't work for him either. And this time, another temper tantrum. "Again, I pray for the President of the United States. I wish his family, his administration or his staff would have an intervention for the good of the country." A reporter said, "Your prayer comments almost suggest you are concerned for his well-being." Pelosi interjected, "I am, and the well-being of the United States of America." Kevin Killinan, the acting director of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, has made few changes to the policies set by former DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, say current and former agency officials. Sources close to Breitbart News, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, say DHS management teams have deliberately sidetracked, stalled, and stopped policies sought by President Donald Trump. Those policies, which were promised by his 2016 presidential campaign, were intended to end illegal immigration, build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, and empower the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, agency to deport illegal aliens living in the country. Nielsen, who led DHS between December 2017 and April 2019, used her term to post like-minded allies into key positions with the approval of the White House's Personnel Office, sources told Breitbart News. Many job candidates who supported Trump's policies were blocked even before the interview stage. Under Killinan, you don't see an influx of these pro-Trump types, one source said. This is whom Killinan is bringing with him. All career federal employees, Washington Beltway people. A DHS official told Breitbart News in a statement that claims suggesting employees at the agency are working against the president are untrue. Any suggestion that former Secretary Nielsen's staff worked against the president's agenda is patently false, the DHS official said. No one would take these extremely difficult and time-consuming jobs if they oppose the president's agenda. Two of the most influential Nielsen allies include Chad Wolf and Elizabeth Newman, who is described as a personal friend of Nielsen's. Newman, one source said, was given so much power under Nielsen's direction that she helped to staff the agency to ensure that Trump's 2016 immigration agenda was either slowed down or thrown out altogether. Newman's role as a senior advisor, the source said, was to execute Nielsen's policy of stopping Trump's policy initiatives and forcing Trump loyalists out of the agency. Months before Nielsen's ouster, Newman was stripped of much of her influence inside DHS because many administration officials disliked her, sources said. Still, Newman remains in a threat prevention position at the agency. Wolf, like Newman, was a personal friend of Nielsen before becoming her chief of staff. Wolf, whom sources describe as an avid opponent of the president and his immigration agenda, remains a senior official coordinating most of all policy at DHS and works with McAleenan on a daily basis, sources said. One source who spoke anonymously to Breitbart News said Wolf and other Trump opponents working at DHS run the agency as though they are not accountable to the president. Instead, the source said, they implement policies they agree with and stop implementation of policies they oppose. McAleenan, who led Customs and Border Protection before becoming acting DHS secretary, has the same agenda as Nielsen had in terms of slowing Trump's immigration initiatives, according to sources. Sources describe McAleenan's DHS as nearly a carbon copy of Nielsen's. There is no daylight between McAleenan's border policy and Nielsen's border policy, the source told Breitbart News. They are completely synonymous when it comes to immigration and border policy. Take, for example, Nielsen's insistence on implementing Trump's border wall system, a move away from the traditional physical barrier that was promised to voters and toward more technology-driven plans that have failed in previous administrations. Sources told Breitbart News that the border wall system terminology first came from McAleenan and was quickly repeated by Nielsen at congressional hearings. Soon after Nielsen's use of the phrase, the president began using the term to describe his border policy. On multiple occasions, McAleenan has referred to his efforts to implement a border wall system to the media, in December 2018 and before Congress this year. Part of McAleenan's operation includes bringing on key staff who are either career federal employees or political appointees approved by the White House Personnel Office. Many of McAleenan's new hires at DHS, sources said, are staffers from the Customs and Border Protection, CBP, agency. Sources repeatedly noted that CBP has a large anti-Trump contingent that was vocal during the 2016 presidential election. Some of those CBP officials that may be brought on to DHS by McAleenan or have already been moved over to the agency are Patrick Flanagan, Valerie Boyd, and Andrew Meehan, according to sources. Many of Nielsen's closest allies, all of whom are described as opponents of Trump's agenda, are no longer with DHS, but they left at her resignation, not because McAleenan forced them out, sources said. 3 of the most openly anti-Trump Nielsen allies, sources said, who are either set to leave DHS or have already left include Jonathan Hoffman, Miles Taylor, and Chris Krebs. Hoffman, who has left DHS for a communications job at Trump's Defense Department, is an aggressive anti-Trump official whom Nielsen had elevated to a spokesperson role at DHS, sources said. Hoffman, one source said, was one of a handful of Nielsen's most loyal allies at the agency. Taylor, also a fierce Nielsen ally who opposes Trump, according to sources, remains McAleenan's chief of staff and has been billed as a national security expert, even though he did not have as much experience as colleagues. Krebs, whom sources said is looking for another job in the Trump administration, was likewise an opponent of Trump's agenda and played a critical role in Nielsen's inner circle, which remained largely insular, sources said. Trump supporters in the agency have said they fear retribution for their support of the president's agenda, often asking Breitbart News not to reveal certain portions of conversations, worried that the smallest of details will reveal their identity and lead to their ousting. Trump's allies, sources said, are becoming fewer and fewer in not only DHS but the administration. A DHS spokesperson did not respond to a request for comment regarding specific claims in time for this publication. Actor John Cusack lashed out at supporters of President Donald Trump after a photo showed him sitting in his seat during a military salute at a recent Chicago Cubs game. "I didn't stand up for Boeing military salute, fast enough for some MAGA fuck, see? Don't even have taste not to brand weapons company all over scoreboard," John Cusack said soon after a photo of him sitting during a Cubs game Boeing military salute went viral on social media. Flag-sucking half-wits, MAGA death cult freaks being anti-war, is pro-troops, pro-human, the hot tub time machine star later said. Cusack also took a shot directly at President Trump, saying, "Trump wraps himself in the U.S. flag, literally hugs it. You think he's a patriot?" Cusack, An ardent Bernie Sanders supporter, barely goes a day without calling the president, his supporters, or Republicans members of a death cult. The 2012 actor also constantly calls for the impeachment of President Trump. Last week, Cusack huddled with Democrats in Washington, D.C., for their marathon public marathoning of special counsel Robert Mueller's 448-page report and demanded that President Trump be removed from office.